Good day to everyone, wherever you are. Thank you for attending today's program. We are going to be talking about product safety training of employees, and I want to differentiate employees from you who are, of course, employees of your companies, but we're going to be talking about how we train non-product safety professionals, the people who we like to think safety is part of everyone's job at a company, but not everyone needs the kind of training that SPSP sponsors for through the programs, the certification programs that you all have seen. So it's a little bit different, but it's I think very important, and certainly one part of any good safety program is training everyone who does anything that relates to safety. So we thought it'd be useful to talk about it. I want to thank Sedgwick Brand Protection for sponsoring our webinar series this year, as they did last year, and we appreciate their sponsorship and participation in SPSP activities. Want to introduce the speakers and the subject, and then we'll get into the topic. We have two great speakers today to help us. Michael Del Negro is Vice President of Product Safety Compliance at Peloton Interactive, and previously was at GE Appliances. Marie-Claude Simard is at BRP, and for those of you who are not aficionados of recreational products, that is the old Bombardier recreational products, now called BRP. And Marie-Claude is the Manager of Product Safety. And I'm not sure if that qualifies you as a recovering lawyer or not, but both of you are lawyers, despite your titles. And that'll play an important part in our discussion about legal discussions, at least to me, legal discussions during the training programs. I will be both moderator, and I have a little bit to contribute to this subject since I have done product safety training for 45 years. First as an in-house lawyer at Westinghouse Electric, starting in 1977, and then at Emerson Electric, and then leaving there. So I have done many hundreds of seminars inside companies, outside companies, to engineers, to lawyers, to law students. I taught product liability and product safety at two law schools for 25 years. So I have a little bit of thoughts on seminars and training and how you can best train your people. Just a disclaimer that none of us are here speaking on behalf of our clients or employers. And so we will be free to talk about our thoughts on what's good, what's not so good in training. And let me guarantee you that we're not going to get through everything that we could possibly talk about. There's a lot of things as we prepared for this, just a lot of things and a lot of nuances. And every company is a little bit different in the way they approach training. So we'll hopefully give you some tips on things that we think work or things that may not work, or some good ideas. But of course, you then have to apply it to your own company and your own personnel. So I'm just going to do an introduction here on the subject. And I like this slide, and I've shown it in prior webinars because I think this is very important for particularly all you product safety people who maybe some of you do compliance, some of you don't, some of you are doing just safety. And that this is my three-legged stool. Product safety by itself is such an amorphous concept that it's great to say, hey, we only want to sell safe products, but what does that mean? And who's defining what's safe? The law uses the term reasonably safe. The CPSC talks about defects and substantial product hazards. The standards talk about, this is an exact way you have to make the product. Does that mean it's safe? Maybe, maybe not. So safety in and of itself is too vague of a concept to leave just to that. And so I believe very strongly, and I'm biased being a lawyer, but because this is the way I teach, is I'm teaching all three subjects there: product safety, and the effect of regulatory and standards compliance and the effect of product liability. Because I believe the goal of any company is to sell safe products, of course, which hopefully then prevent accidents. So that's our first goal. We don't want to have accidents, and that makes the second part of it easier. However, the law and regulatory requirements and standards compliance will help define and shape what is safe enough, because that is the question. How safe is safe enough? And so during the process, we need to think about the other two legs of the stool here, in addition to product safety, which will then allow us to defend ourselves if accidents do occur. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some safety folks think that it's too defensive to think about lawsuits and to think about how we're going to defend ourselves in litigation if it occurs. I don't think that's a problem at all. I think any responsible company should think about that, because we're going to have litigation possibly. We're going to have discussions with the government. We're going to have discussions with consumers and maybe even our shareholders about whether we're doing enough to provide a safe product. So thinking about these things before sale, as we're making and selling, designing, making, and selling products, I don't think is inappropriate, and I think it should be part then of any training, which I believe is going to, as you'll hear, is going to help our people figure out how safe to make our products. So with that said, I want to turn it over to Michael to talk about his thoughts on training and the framework of training.
Thanks, Ken, and good morning, everybody. Hopefully folks can hear me pretty well. I'm here from Seattle. I think in the virtual world, it's just important to say where we are. Sometimes it can be kind of amorphous. So I'm here on a rainy, cold Seattle. And, Ken had a three-legged stool. I don't have a stool here. I just have a funnel. But this is my object that I want to use to kind of illustrate, as Ken said, a framework for some of the reasons that companies want to do, should do, and in some ways have to do internal product safety training. And I really, for me, I am a lawyer, as Ken said. He outed me, but I'm also a psychologist previously by training, and I view some of these issues through the lens of sort of an organizational psychologist, someone who looks at behavior and how can we shape behavior. And I say that because I think some of the thinking around product safety is, as the question Ken raised, how safe is safe enough? It requires some training and getting employees to think a certain way about, what are the right things to do. We all, of course, want safe products. That's a priority for companies and producers, but how do we get there? So for me in the funnel, I think of this as layers of training. Obviously, we want people to know they work in a regulated industry. That's really important. Oftentimes companies forget to communicate that. They leave that to the work of the lawyers. But I think it's important for employees to understand, hey, there's a regulatory framework. It has certain expectations, and the policies that the company defines is a way of pointing toward those external frameworks to say, here's what we're going to do to meet those expectations over time. And that's sort of the broadest level of training, why we do training. So folks essentially understand the rules. Another element of this that I think is essential is enhancing compliance over time, improving the way organizations, which hopefully are focused on and continuous improvement, get better. You have to do it through reinforcement and through training. And finally, and this is the smallest part of the funnel, but to me, the most important, this is where the magic happens, which is training and resulting in change in the company's organizational culture, the way that they set the tone around these issues, which starts at the top, has to be a top-down and a bottom-up activity. And so training is, all of these elements come together, and they're very important. Why are they important? Well, in large part, they're important because this is how companies can organize themselves around handling product safety information appropriately. The government has expectations for many years that companies conduct regular internal training for appropriate employees. That's now a staple in settlement agreements that we see. And the Department of Justice, remember, there's a layer to this too, beyond the CPSC and the regulators, which is DOJ, when they're looking at how effective is a company's safety or broader corporate compliance program. They look at, is the program, being applied earnestly, and does it work in practice? And one of the ways that they assess that is to what extent the company is conducting real training. So in summary, and then I'll transition here, overall, the goal of training is to work through this funnel to deter misconduct, of course, but also to kind of establish some norms so employees know, hey, when this information arises and it's ambiguous, what's the appropriate way to act and handle it? I'll turn it back to
Okay,
you.
Marie-Claude, do you have some comments on that?
Yes, I have comments, and I like what Michael said about continuous improvement. And I like to see the best analogy I found with my job is I'm a gardener. I'm like the gardener in chief. When you train is almost it's you need to have patience to train, but then as you need to have patience when you are a gardener, it's a virtue, and you will plant seed. You will do training and you plant seed, and sometimes in some departments, some area, it will work like magic. You don't have to do much efforts, and then in other departments, it's more difficult. We need more water, more fertilizer. You need to go more frequently, and as your garden expands, whoa, you need to start over again because you have new people. So continuously you need to train again, and you need to go back. You train maybe a year or 2 years, and then you need to repeat, because you cannot let your garden alone too long. And unfortunately, sometimes you will have poison ivy, so you need to remove some ideas or bad culture. And also sometimes the mower, the lumberjack is coming, and because people are leaving the company, so they were pillars, they were good people with a good knowledge, but then up they go. So you need to start over again to rebuild, this training is knowledge. So for me, the analogy is completely perfect. That's what I do in my job. I garden. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you for that image, Marie, of being a gardener. I'm going to go to the next slide. I just want to say one thing. To me, I believe the training I do has been successful. One, if people are just more aware of the legal risks, the regulatory risks, the safety risks, understand what at least generally all, those my three stools require of companies in making safe and compliant products. So awareness is my goal, that they're aware of these kinds of things. And secondly, and Michael alluded to it, is that they know what they don't know. Is that, because no training is ever going to give you all the answers to these questions. And frankly, we don't want you doing this by yourself necessarily. That you guys, both of you, are going to be answering all kinds of questions, and hopefully the awareness will make people have a lot more questions, so that they know what they don't know, they know when to ask questions, and they know who to ask. And then also through the training, you're going to learn about things that are on their minds, and to create more resources for your people to help them also understand better what the requirements are and when to start asking questions. So it's a continuous process. This isn't just go sit through a day of training and then I can go do my job and never ask any questions. It's the start of the process, not the end of the process. And that's really important. So with that said, here are the topics we're going to get to. And we will attempt to get to all of them. We may not get to the last one. We'll see. We can do that quickly. But let me start with Michael then on the question. Let's see. No, I'm sorry. Wrong one. I've got to go back to my slide here. I am starting on, just a second. Yeah, Marie-Claude, you're going to start on who should receive training. So.
Yes. Yeah, and you can go to the next slide right away. So so we see it. So we should do the training. It's really a strategy of how you want to attack it. I see it like a grid. You have horizontally, you have all your departments. Marketing, production, quality assurance, and then you have vertically all the managers, the high management, the board of directors. So you have this grid, and you need to decide, who can be merged together. And it also, of course, depends on the size of your company. If your company is very small, you may want to put almost everyone in the same room. But, for our company, we're 30,000 employees, I cannot put everyone in the same room or even train them together, because the people do things differently and they have different goals, and you really want to try to separate it. However, I have 2-3 specific points on that. Sometimes I want to have at least a manager, a director with the engineering group, for example, because it will give credibility to the trainer, and the person can reinforce your message, and they will see, you know, this manager along with you. So it can really help you to get through some important messages. But you need to adjust, you know, you will not have the same messages to the board than to even the mechanics. I train the test pilots. So I'm not, yes, it's the same topic, but the test pilots doesn't need to know in the same depth, you know, some topics than my development engineers. And one important topic, you know, you see outside suppliers, and Ken, I know you will talk about it, but when I thought about it, you know, traditionally you're thinking about suppliers, which is the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers on a, you know, traditional production company. But with the HR issues and resources, we see internally a lot of consultants that are full-time consultants, either in the engineering department, in the marketing department, publicity agencies, employees that even have, you know, the email address, you know, the same email address. They are like hidden consultants, I would say. And sometimes we were excluding them because it's an employee training, but in reality, they really do the same thing day to day. You know, they're there, they are developing your products, developing your campaign. And I would suggest to add them together because they can do as many damage, or they can create risk as many as your employees. And maybe they have less knowledge because there was no onboarding, and they may be a little bit more remote from your culture. So I would say it would be very important to identify them and to bring them with you in the training.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, that's really good. I really liked Marie-Claude's gardener analogy. Somebody used a different one, which is, you know, when you're in-house and doing this type of work, it's like being on the crew of ship. You want everyone to understand what the basic safety briefing is. So to some extent, there's a baseline level of awareness of all things safety that you want everyone to know. Just like when you get on a cruise ship, everyone gets a safety briefing so that you know what the essential safety processes are in the case of an emergency. And it's not a perfect analogy, but the point is, I actually think that it's very easy to do training that is focused on, let's say, the engineers who are tasked with managing safety, they'll get training. But what about folks in sales or in the procurement organization? Do they also need training? And I think, getting back to the cruise ship analogy, you really do want everyone to have a minimum level of understanding of what's the framework here, why is this important? The commercial team, even though their job is very different in orientation, for them to understand the company's commitment to product safety, what's expected of employees as issues arise, and to be able to communicate about it, because, and I'll weave this through my theme today, Ken and Marie-Claude, which is communication internally around product safety issues is an unnatural act. And what I mean by that is it takes a lot of discipline to communicate effectively and clearly, and some of this can only be reinforced through training. So for me, training really should be cross-functional. I do believe there should be sort of dedicated safety training for the technical teams, because they need a little bit more deep dive on failure mode analyses, what can go wrong, how to think constructively about foreseeable misuse, these concepts that the lawyers are always talking about. Those that aren't readily understandable unless you've kind of been exposed to the field for a while. But I do think that the key is having a little bit of cross-functional stuff so that the disciplines are talking to each other. And usually that's where questions arise, as largely because engineers and lawyers see the world in very different ways. Not wrong ways, but just different ways.
Yeah, and let me say on this, I have had, and not with 30,000 employees, that would be a whole different issue, but with a smaller company, having different departments in the same room at the same time has resulted in some very, very significant insights, because the purchasing department needs to consult with the design engineers and the manufacturing engineers to be sure they understand what products to source and what kind of contracts are important and what kind of protection is important for those kinds of parts. The marketing department needs to hear about what engineers are doing, and engineers need to hear about what marketing does, because you don't want the marketing literature created in a way that is shows your product being used unsafely. And unless so, when I've done the multi-functional seminars, you got the departments talking to each other more than they might have beforehand, and understand what the roles of each department are, so that they can better coordinate during the design process to be sure that somebody doesn't screw up something, mainly because they didn't talk to another department about it. So it's now you can't do that with thousands of employees, but you want to at least think about who's going to be working together and for the same purpose, and who would be useful to communicate with each other. Maybe you just use the manager of the department or something like that, but it's certainly not everybody on this list needs to be there, or you do it by department. There's a happy medium there. The outside suppliers, I just threw that in at the last minute. I'm not suggesting you have outside suppliers come to your internal training. What I'm suggesting more is that, should you require your outside suppliers to have training? Should you look at the training as it applies to you? I mean, just the very simple question of, when does an outside supplier, when should they be communicating with the OEM about safety problems? And what should they be, and what information do you want to receive? So there are some things that could impact the future liability if your outside suppliers aren't doing what you expect them to do. So that maybe is dealt with. Maybe Michael and Marie-Claude go to a supplier training and do a 1-hour presentation on what you as an OEM are expecting of your suppliers, during the design manufacturing process.
Well, Ken, if we have time, let me just double click on that point. We had some discussion among ourselves about this topic, and this dovetails with, again, product safety is part of a number of corporate compliance programs, and there's always a question of how much should a company take on in terms of responsibility for working with its suppliers and vendors to make sure that they do things the right way. And I certainly agree with Ken's comments that suppliers should be held accountable, should be held to meeting certain safety requirements when OEMing product. That said, as a matter of just good corporate hygiene and separate corporate form, you really want companies to meet expectations, but do it on their own and not take on that responsibility. There are exceptions, of course, and if we bring suppliers on campus or on site and they're collaborating with us, they have to know how to operate safely and follow process when they're operating within a joint space. And there's some joint venture arrangements that are important. But I think this is one where companies are well served by setting expectations for suppliers, holding them accountable to saying, have you done in your internal training? Do you have a code of conduct? Do you have a safety policy? Show me that you're doing this training, but not actually stepping in their shoes. And that's my view. I realize there are other views on this.
Okay, let's try the next topic here. Should it be internal or external? There are not as many as there used to be external training programs. There are a few around, so there's not that much to choose from. But certainly SPSP or ICFSO, that's of course one of the external trainings. University of Wisconsin has a program. The certification programs that SPSP are doing, and I think everybody who's doing external training believes that networking among product safety folks is useful. The trade associations, they're also doing training. So, it's very different because you can't talk about confidential things in external training. So I'll start with, let's see, Michael, I guess I'm starting with you on this one. About would you encourage your employees, non-product safety professionals now, to go to an engineering program, for example, on product safety? Or do you want to really keep it in-house and have them have control over what they're hearing?
I think the answer is yes. I think we want folks to be exposed to a variety of things and be kind of omnivores for information and training. And just very briefly, I think it's helpful to have employees get sort of, let's call it, more general awareness training. Some of the standard development organizations like UL do some very excellent training, sometimes in coordination with trade associations. And I think those kinds of, or ICFSO, another outstanding organization, but they offer new perspectives, different disciplines who come to the table. Often the regulators are present in some of those sessions. I think it's very important that employees see what the regulators have to say, to understand that perspective. That's really a key part of this learning curve that we can, as in-house folks, bring employees along so that they're exposed to this, so that it's familiar. On the other hand, I think internal training is the only way to hold individual employees accountable, to create some clear expectations for how your team or teams should act, and to have roles and responsibilities defined. That kind of general stuff can't be addressed in general training. And Marie-Claude and I are talking internally with our organizations, knowing what those roles are and being able to kind of convey what's expected for different roles as a part of the safety organization. That's really essential. And so I do think it has to be both. If the company can afford both, that's great. But at a minimum, internal training companies, we have to do that. I think that's sort of the table stakes.
Marie-Claude?
Yeah, you should send your gardeners to the external training. They need to know how to do it. So for sure, you need to have the main people who are involved in product safety, to go to meet their peers and know what's going out there. Because you cannot stay in your bubble, for many years. Things evolve, and what was good in your training 15 years ago may not be good anymore. So there's an evolution also. So and sometimes there's very good, like you said, specific, very technical training on points. So you should be able to look at what's offered and maybe publicize, suggest some training that is external. But it will, like Michael said, it will never replace the internal training, that it's really targeted specifically to your company, the specific products, the examples, the experience, the specific people, and also because people are so busy that you really need to have this internal training targeted and tailored for the needs, for the specific needs. So it's a mix of both.
Yeah, and I would say the external training can be very useful, not just in the networking area, but also just to hear what other companies are doing.
Yeah.
What you're doing may or may not be adequate, and maybe somebody's got a better idea out there. So certainly over the years, I have done tons of trade association meetings, and those have been very useful. But what other companies are doing may not apply to yours. So I think it's a combination of both. And of course, on the external training, you would have less people going out and doing that training and report back to your company about what they're seeing out there. So that's another way to do it. And related to that is then who should do the training. And now we'll talk about internal training, of course. And I will say again, I've been doing this so long. When I started doing product safety training and did it for both engineers and lawyers, one of the questions I would have is, why is a lawyer involved in product safety training? I'll call you after I get sued, but what's your role in being preventive? So I've spent my entire career trying to convince companies, manufacturers, that lawyers actually have some useful things to say other than no before you get sued, that we can be helpful both in helping you understand what your legal obligations are, but just in judgment and advice about how to prepare yourself if you are sued later on. And you can't do that after you've sold the product, you got to do it beforehand. So, but early on, there was a lot of interesting questions about why I was involved in why I sat on the product safety committee at Westinghouse Electric, which was 1977. Why did they put a lawyer on a product safety committee? That was the first question. And then secondly, what role do I really play that could be useful? So whether lawyers are involved in the training or not is one of the questions, and who else should be involved. Obviously, if you've got full-time people like you guys who are doing safety, you're taking the lead on it. But I think Marie-Claude, you're up on this one. Start with you on this one. Who should do the training and be involved in it?
Yeah, we should do the training. There's a question in that. Do I like ask someone like Ken to come to my company, which is an internal training given by an outside person? And of course, the good side to have an outside person is that if I don't have the knowledge internally to give the training, for sure, I need to have someone who knows about it. Sometimes the person has better presentation skills. You know, you need to choose someone historically, and this is stereotypes, I apologize, but litigation training, legal training maybe have more will, or they want to speak in front of people and to train. And then you have your knowledgeable engineer, but is just completely afraid to speak in front of people and will be a terrible trainer. So you really need to think about it. So you may want to have this external person. And sometimes when you have this external person and you hear it from someone else, suddenly, you know, the message is getting through. So that may be a good idea to have an external person to do your internal training. On the flip side, hear it from another person maybe can have the completely different effect. You know, people will say, I don't rely to this person. He doesn't know the reality of my company. You know, they will shut like an oyster and not listen to what the person will say. So you need to avoid the disconnection, and the person who you choose could be an engineer, could be a person from litigation, whatever, whomever, but the person will need to be able to provide examples and to really understand the reality. And because you need to, the internal person, what is good about it, I think, is that it avoids the damage control that you can have with the outside person. Sometimes the outside person will overkill it, and you will have employees that are paralyzed. They said, oh, this guy, it happened, you know, to us that they were afraid that they would go automatically to jail, you know, and you have it sometimes with different culture. A person in Europe that never heard about US litigation, that they hear it from the first time, you know, they can completely panic. And you don't want that, because then you do your training and then nobody wants to do a risk assessment, nobody wants to develop a product anymore, and that's not good. So if you, when you choose it, if you choose someone from the outside, take the time to prepare and to discuss with this person and to make sure that you tailor the training and you know what the person will say and what is necessary for the training. So that will pay if you do that. And then if it's an internal person, there's a lot of choices. To just need to be knowledgeable and to have done some external training so they are up to speed with what's going on in the product safety field.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, and I think I would just add to Marie-Claude's good comments that occasionally you want to make a statement, and the company's at a point in its its progress that it needs to have an external presenter, a third-party person who's seen as a credible expert. And there's a benefit to doing that at the right time. And what I mean by that is whether the company's going through an enforcement matter, a settlement or something, and there's a desire to say, okay, we're really going to make this a more formal activity, bringing in an outside presenter who's an expert or a recognized professional in the field is a way of saying, here's a formal safety training that we're putting on to employees. On the other hand, I also agree with Marie-Claude's comments, good comments, that having this be in-house is one of the ways we can speak directly to employees and sort of educate and reinforce the roles we expect them to play. I have found it helpful to have two presenters, often an engineer and a lawyer working together, so that both are speaking to the participants in the training, both can give examples from their perspective, their discipline. And I found that to be kind of helpful. And it's true, lawyers talk a lot, sort of that's part of our profession at times to be able to communicate. But engineers have an important voice in this area. And I have found that other engineers will tend to listen a little bit more to engineers who sometimes are participants in the training. So I think it's making sure you find the right person. And then we're going to talk about documentation later, Ken, but in connection with that, making sure you've got, good training materials, a good record of who was trained, stuff like that. But we'll come back to that.
Now, let me differentiate between, if you did have a lawyer, an external lawyer involved, I want to differentiate between a lawyer who does what we normally call preventive counseling versus a litigator. Now, if you have a lot of litigation and you believe that you want to learn lessons from that litigation, then you might want to have a litigator come and talk to you. Now, you guys will be very careful about what they say, because you don't want them to say that the sky is falling, which litigators normally do. I mean, litigators see the worst of everything. Litigators would prefer that you not do a risk assessment. They would prefer if you do a risk assessment, you don't write it down because they've never seen a good risk assessment in their life and they don't know how to defend it. So many things that litigators would tell a group are not that helpful on the product safety side. So you want to be careful before you involve an outside litigator. Now, an outside lawyer who is involved in preventive counseling has a much different perspective because their goal is to help you prevent accidents and to protect yourself, which I believe are the main goals, at least that I would view as part of the training and part of your program. And they can give you a little bit more positive feedback as far as what you should do and how to do it carefully so that you minimize future risk. Litigators, again, have a much different perspective. So, and there are some litigators out there who do both preventive counseling and litigation. And so hopefully they put on their preventive hat when they're talking to you guys in the seminar. Michael, did you have something to say on that one?
No. I mean,
Okay.
but you're doing is a nice segue into the next slide if you want
Well,
to.
one other thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention, is that I have in the past with some in-house lawyers, they want to do the presentation, but they don't have, they don't have the time to prepare a presentation, particularly one that's got some legal input. So I have prepared a presentation. I take the PowerPoint and we put in the subjects they want, and I actually do the talk in the notes, and I send it to the in-house attorney, and they go do the presentation. So there's a way to kind of get the best of both worlds if you don't have the time to. Not our two speakers, but other in-house attorneys who don't practice product safety or product liability full time. They may not be up on the law as much as they could be. And so that can be taken care of by having an external person prepare the presentation for them and have them present it. The real important part, though, is to be able to answer questions. And you can't really prepare much for that. So if you have a hard time with questions during the presentation, you can always say, I'll get back to you on that, and then maybe consult with some external folks if you need to on that point. Okay, let's go to the next topic here. What subjects should we cover? And if I got this straight here, let's see. I'll start off because I have one more slide, and then I'll turn it over to Marie-Claude. It's very dependent on who your attendees are. So how you answer the first three questions are going to help you figure out then what subjects are going to be covered. And, one company's experience is different than another. If you have litigation, you may want to talk more about your litigation. If you don't have litigation, you don't. Let's say a company's never had a recall before. You don't really want to sit there and talk about how to do a recall if you've never had one. I mean, that you may need to do it ultimately, but not in a general awareness training program. So it's very dependent on the company's experience and whether there are full-time product safety people or not. The answer to the question is sort of, well, it depends. So, but let's talk about it. And I'm just going to throw up a slide here about some of the subjects that I cover in a half-day program. And, but I've done half-day, full-day, 2-day. So it's very dependent on the length. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Marie-Claude to talk about the subjects she likes to cover in the programs.
Yeah, I will talk to you my thought process when I'm preparing to a presentation. And what I'm thinking of, the first thing is, okay, what are the risks that are generated by this group? Okay, what are they can create in terms of product safety risk? For example, the marketing people, of course, they can create a foreseeable use of, because they will put publicity, material, engineering, they're developing the product, so what what they can generate from risk, but so it really helps to know what do I need to tell. If it's high management, maybe it's the budget allocated or the resources allocated to the product safety matters. And then what type of, and it's touching what Michael at the very, very beginning you alluded to, behaviors. What are the behaviors I want to maintain or I want to change, and how I will change the behavior. What's the best way? Do I need to find a very catchy example that I had in litigation, or that a very important recall that we had or someone else had, or some special advertising? So what will convince them to change the behaviors? And then it helps me, creating the topics that I want to talk about. And of course, it's different if it's like a new employee training where the basic of product safety, you will need to address it. And sometimes, if it's a continuous training, then you want to maybe adjust different things. But it really depends of what I need to change. And also it goes with how much time I have. As you go vertically up the ladder, you may have many topics, but maybe you have only 15 minutes with high management. So you will need to prioritize. It's a question of strategy, but I like to see it into risk and behavior changes.
Hey, Michael?
Yeah, I like Marie-Claude's comments. I would just add that certainly the legal framework is really important. I think it's important to illustrate kind of at a high level, here are some commonalities among the safety regimes, because there are commonalities, but we're not trying to turn everyone into a product safety lawyer or a regulatory lawyer. Everyone has a defined role to play on the team, on the safety team. And so for me, the legal requirements are important. They're certainly a foundation in terms of setting expectations around policy, but I don't think it should be the focal point of training. I think it should be how to handle safety information when it comes into an organization, what's the appropriate way to respond to that, the process elements. I do want to make one comment here and double click on something that Ken has raised as a theme, which is sometimes litigation counsel, when they do training, can introduce an element of more risk around the liability or the litigation aspect than on the safety aspect. And that line isn't necessarily always clear. But companies can do harm when they do training. And as an example, there have been enforcement matters where company lawyers were sort of critiqued for tempering, sort of the tempering communications that lawyers tend to do, to essentially say, use euphemisms when talking about safety, or we don't talk about Bruno, have some catchphrase where people avoid saying the difficult thing or the thing that concerns them. From my perspective, that's not productive today. I think that's not a best practice. We certainly want people to be good communicators, and I focus a section on all the training that I've worked on how to communicate effectively around safety, how to be objective about it, and to try and avoid that particular pitfall, because I do think that's just a natural one that as lawyers we don't write that down, don't say that, and what we should be saying is write it well, be objective, be clear, don't catastrophize, but just sort of be just the facts, ma'am or sir, be more accurate about it. And that's really important. And the other element of this that's important is just the urgency that organizations should have with respect to safety, and teaching teams that, we have to prioritize safety. It has to be a focal point of what this organization is going to be about. And safety training is one of the key ways of communicating that sense of urgency.
Yeah, if this again is like a half-day program, if I turned it into a full-day program, I do add a section on document management that Michael mentioned, which is really important. And in fact, we'll do a webinar in the fall on document management, because if you don't adequately document your safety processes, it's hard to defend yourself, whether it's the government asking questions or consumers or plaintiffs' lawyers and plaintiffs' experts. So, how you document the process and do it in a responsible way that accurately portrays what you've done can be important. So what Michael's talking about is during the training, I talk usually about documentation, but you do not want to leave the impression that you're asking them to hide problems. So talking to particularly the engineering department about what do you do when you have a concern about safety, how are you supposed to deal with it? Orally, in writing, by email, how do you follow up? We talk about closing the loop on those kinds of communication. So how you deal with safety issues is very important, but you never want to leave the impression that you're asking them to downplay safety issues or hide them. And as Michael mentioned, one company in particular we're all aware of got fined significantly for having a seminar done by a lawyer where it looked like that's what they were trying to do, was to hide safety problems. So you really don't want to do that. But talking about it is important, and talking about it responsibly is important. Okay. So I guess the answer on this one is, well, it depends who's there. It depends how long you have. Depends the experience of the company. So I'll give you the good lawyer-like answer. It depends. There's a lot of it depends. And so when you're planning your training, I mean, you really need to sit and think about all of the things we're talking about and come up with a plan for who's coming, what information do you want to impart to them. And, I mean, this is a general program. If I was talking just to sales and marketing, that would be very different than if it's just design engineers or the technical writers. So if you break it down into groups and don't have everybody there, it's a much different kind of a program. But there could be elements in this general program that you'd want to impart to them. Okay.
Ken, let me just add one other comment there, which is, and you have a good set of examples here, but safety by design and design practices, which you could say, well, why are you training on that? Those are kind of engineering concepts, but that is the start of product development. That is where ideation begins, and companies need to think thoughtfully about what they want to see in their product designs, what they should reasonably anticipate could go wrong in a product design. And that's just teaching that and reinforcing that message with examples is really an essential theme. So, that's one where having engineers present who can kind of give examples around that is very helpful.
Good, thank you. Okay, next topic is just a potpourri of topics, I guess. So I'll ask, let's see, I was going to ask Michael to start off on that. And I'll throw in one other one, which I don't have on the slide here, and that is, how many times do you train people? Once, or is that it, or you do it multiple times? So any comments you have on any of these topics, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly there are two views, right? There's one is synchronous, what the compliance world likes to refer to as synchronous training, which is live in-person training. There are real benefits to that. It's interactive. You force people to kind of be at the table and to listen to training. It's less passive because it can be interactive. And it lends itself to questions and a more engaging back and forth with audience. That kind of training, I think, is best reserved for sort of periodic, call it every 2 years. It's more time intensive. Businesses are very busy and leaders have limited time. But I find it culturally really important to immersing folks in the discussion. Recorded training modules are really important. I mean, we all have to be pragmatic when working in companies about what can be accomplished and what's the right way to do training. And I think recorded trainings, whether in writing or in video, are really helpful. They create a record of who received the training, and you can kind of document that and have traceability to your audience that did the training. But I am a fan of the synchronous training because it draws people out a little bit, and folks who might be afraid or a little timid to ask questions are often prompted to. And that's where some of the learning happens, and people begin to see, hey, the organization's committing to this. This is a training that's important. So I think that's helpful. And I also, again, what are we aiming for here? What's the overarching goal? The goal is obviously to move the ship forward a little bit on how the organization thinks around safety, but also shield the company in the event there is a DOJ investigation or CPSC investigation, to show, hey, we took this seriously. We applied our program in good faith. We conducted the training and documented it. And this aspect of it, in terms of how it's conducted, is targeting that goal of making sure we can demonstrate to the regulators, plural, that we've taken our compliance commitments in this area to heart.
Claude?
I agree with everything. I would add that I'm not a fan of recorded. I really like more the interactions I can have with people. Maybe I will need to become more pragmatic about it. The only thing I think we have not spoken about, that it's a form of training that is also very effective. But mentoring, you may also want to identify for specific functions, mentoring of product safety. Yes, it's one-on-one. Yes, it's more time consuming, but it could be very efficient for very specific functions that you may want to pair two people together. We are doing this, and the benefit of it is really good for younger engineers entering the company.
Let me ask you this. What about, let's assume the company has 10 customer service people spread around the country in different offices, we'll say. Just assume they're not in one place. And you want to do a seminar to the 10 customer service people and talk about how to record customer complaints. Would you do a Zoom call? I mean, what do you think about Zoom as a replacement for, not recorded, but a replacement for in-person?
Yeah, but yes, we can. For a customer people, we have it's an exception where we have the recorded, because there's so many people changing, and particularly in tier 1 level. But yeah, Zoom is working. You know, I've done it. We went through COVID, and I have people all over the world. So sometimes to put the teams together and one room is not possible anymore. I was alluding to HR issues. Now we have to find people. You know, we have people that are working remotely because they cannot immigrate yet in Canada, or so they're working remotely. So we need to have this Zoom training, even if I wish to have all the people in the room. It may not be feasible anymore.
Michael, you have any thoughts on Zoom versus in-person versus whatever?
Look, we all have to be pragmatic in the environment we're operating in, and Zoom is here to stay. And there are benefits of Zoom for sure. And sometimes you're in a geography where you can't reach another site, and if you have a multi-site business, which many of us do, you have to rely on that tool. So we should all use the tools we have available for this type of stuff. I think we have to be flexible. And you know, I also prefer sort of in-person training. I think that's shows more of a commitment than sort of the static training. But Zoom is absolutely, you know, if it's there, let's use it, you know, when it's appropriate. I think that makes sense.
Well, as a follow-up question, what about the length? What do you think the attention span of, you know, again, non-product safety professional is in a program like this? How long would you suggest? I'll start with Michael on that.
Look, I think this is the baby bear approach. It has to be just right. And, you know, 2 hours is probably too long. I think if it's in-person training, I think about an hour and a half, 90 minutes is probably the attention span of most adult employees. I think, you know, if you certainly could accomplish it in an hour, but if you're trying to go through framework, policies, examples or scenarios, right? Because I think scenario-based learning is one of the best ways to help employees, you know, see what happened to other companies and the examples that flowed from that to help us issue spot and navigate some of these risk areas appropriately. I think that scenario-based stuff is engaging. People like that, employees like that piece of it, but that takes time. So for me, the baby bear answer is about an hour and a half if you're going to do sort of the more lengthy, wholesome training.
Okay, Marie-Claude?
Yeah, I completely agree. I do exactly the same thing, and I have not consulted with Michael. If you do in person, I would say if you have the benefit of doing it, and really don't plan to have another meeting right away. I would say stay in the room, reserve the room longer, so people that wants to have chat with you one-on-one, sometimes that will happen. They will not want to ask questions to you directly in front of everyone, but they want to speak with you. So don't be in a hurry to pack up your bags. If it's in person, you know, stay around.
Now, I'm going to comment on both this slide, and it kind of merges into the next slide too. I mean, I've done a program before where I did 3 hours to the whole company, and it was not 30,000 employees. It was, you know, like 100 or whatever it was, a fairly small number. And then at the end of the seminar, and everybody heard it, each department was supposed to meet over lunch and then come back in the afternoon. And then the CEO and I would meet with each department, and we would answer questions that they had, Plus, the CEO asked each department to come up with a list of 10 things that they were going to do differently as a result of the morning program. And so, which I thought was a fascinating approach to the whole thing, because that was sort of like, hey, yeah, we heard you, we've talked about it. Here's some questions we have for you that relate to our department, design engineering or sales and marketing or whatever. But here are the things that we think we can do better going forward. And I thought that was a very interesting approach, and certainly kept their attention because the CEO demanded that they do that. So that was not a bad approach to it. I would say it doesn't happen normally, but it did happen, and I was fascinated by the results of that. A couple other comments I have on this one. Some companies try, particularly if they have a lawyer doing the presentation, they try to make the slides, the PowerPoint, attorney-client privilege. To me, that's overkill. I think that's a bad idea. It just looks like you're trying to hide something. The slides don't normally have, very sensitive, confidential information. And frankly, if you have one of your engineers depose later, you want them to be able to say they've done safety training. And maybe they have the slides, maybe they don't, but you shouldn't be scared about it, or you should be prepared for those slides possibly to be discovered in litigation, but you want to be positive about it, take a positive approach to it. One other thing is I've tried before is in preparation for the seminar, is I've passed out articles, some articles that describe sort of the basis of product safety, the basis of product liability. So then I don't have to spend a lot of time going into it. It's something that's easily understandable, 10 pages worth, and ask them to read it, and I'll assume that they've read it before we start the seminar. So then that saves us some time, and maybe we can get to the 90 minutes or 2 hours, because I don't have to repeat some of that stuff that's already in there. Let's see, I'm just looking here. Yeah, it's hard to do it in less than a half a day, in my view. And I do a lot of talking, so I don't, maybe it's me more than the audience. So maybe they zone out after an hour and a half, I'm not sure, but hopefully not. But again, given my goals of being awareness and giving them an opportunity to ask questions, I'm not asking them to remember all of this. I'm not asking them to think they've got all the answers now. It's just awareness. So I think it's, I'm not concerned about doing it longer than the 90 minutes. So I'll go to the last slide here, and then we'll see if, oops, sorry, I gotta.
Yeah, we're closing. We have 2 minutes left. So it's
Yeah,
like we want to let
gauging the effectiveness
on time.
Yeah, well, and we didn't have any questions that I need to pose to the group here. So I think having a test at the end is not a terrible idea. I think, one, it confirms they've signed that they've attended. They confirm they understand things. And it also confirms that they haven't misunderstood something like hiding safety problems. You don't quite say it that way, but you put on kind of positive things there. So when they say yes, 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 it looks good. If you ever had to produce that document later on, that they've received this training, that they understand the safety processes the company's established and the goals of the company in providing safe products. So I think you could create some kind of a test that would show they understand and show that they don't misunderstand certain things or have a misimpression about stuff. I can't say I've done it before, but I've sometimes done tests at the beginning of the program, and then we looked at their answers at the end of the program to see if they have new information now that shows where they got the answers wrong. But do either of you have a comment on that suggestion, or do you think it's a bad idea or a good idea?
As my spouse likes to remind me, feedback is a gift, and I think that ways we can get feedback is very important in our training. Whether you do a test or a survey, I think it is important to seek feedback from participants, and they often will give good feedback on presenter style, presenter content. And I have routinely done some surveys to get feedback. I think the testing stuff is more to demonstrate that you're holding people somewhat accountable, and I don't think it has to be a real complex test, but the survey is important because feedback's important.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think SPSP is going to put these slides, a link to the webinar, and possibly some other material that could be helpful to you in this on the training side of it. Also, we might consider doing a white paper for you all on some ideas about training and some examples of training that could be helpful to you in getting started on developing a training program. It's even possible that we ultimately would even create some videos that you could use in sort of general training. That's the external part of it, and it's a video, so you may not like that idea, but we'll consider doing something like that you can use at least to get people started on the concept of what's safety and what's regulatory compliance, and then you can apply. Then you can go into your own training and talk about it specifically for your company. So we're thinking about things that we at SPSP can do to assist everyone in trying to meet your goals, which are everyone's goals here. If you have specific questions of that you'd like answered, the general email there at the top of this slide is fine. The email there, or if you just want to ask any of the speakers a question, just send it to them. Or if you have a specific question for any of the three of us, there are our emails. Second here. Oops, sorry. The next webinar, June 8th. Rod Freeman from Cooley in London and his folks are going to talk about that topic there, international product safety landscape. And even if you don't sell internationally, this is useful to look at because there's a lot of stuff that's developed in Europe that actually is helpful to you, whether it's recall procedures, recall notices, risk assessment, post-sale risk assessment, even pre-sale risk assessment. So a lot of interesting things going on in Europe that might be helpful to you, even if you're not selling internationally. So I think, Rod and his folks are on top of all of that and can provide you a quick update on these things as they're developing in the EU and through ISO and other places. So you'll get the invitation for the seminar, this webinar, June 8 webinar tomorrow. And we want to thank all of you for attending. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Marie-Claude. We appreciate it. And we look forward to your future participation in these programs. Thank you all.
Thank you both.
Thank you.